Hello, I'm Paul Wright. I teach in the Department of English at Cabrini University, where I teach film and media studies as well as early modern literature. I'm putting my film hat on today because I am also a proud affiliated faculty member of the Bryn Mawr Film Institute in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. And of course, due to the coronavirus crisis, BMFI cannot offer its usual slate of film education classes, which I often teach. So in lieu of that, as a temporary measure, to get us all our fix of film and film discussion, we're going to be discussing online a number of important and classic films. The film up for next week is The Best Years of Our Lives from 1946, directed by William Wyler, a true and important American classic. This film is a good pick as well because Memorial Day is upcoming and we thought we would go with something in that vein. Best Years of Our Lives is not as much about the experience overseas in combat as it is about what it's like to come home from combat and what it's like to survive it and how difficult it is to readjust, to adapt to life as a civilian rather than a soldier, to reintegrate with your friends and your family and your job and all the rest, if you have a job even. And in many ways, the film talks about the not only difficulty, but in some cases, impossibility of ever really coming home. So if you think of this film as part of a subgenre, right, the veteran returns home, there are all kinds of examples later on that many of us may know. So in the Vietnam era, you have Coming Home and The Deer Hunter as great examples of what combat does and what it's like to return home for the veteran. What combat does to a veteran, what it's like to return home for the veteran. Other conflicts have had similar films made in that vein ever since. The template for this, the gold standard for it really, is established by Wyler in this film. Why is this film so important and so well made? Well, it starts with a great idea. Samuel Goldwyn, the famous Hollywood mogul, saw a need culturally, if you will, and also an opportunity commercially to make a film about the combat veteran's experience. So in order to get that film done right and to hopefully win the awards that it eventually won, Goldwyn would turn to Wyler because he was already an incredibly accomplished director. Wyler also had a bit of authenticity to bring to the project in the sense that he had been in service during World War II. Even though he was in his late 30s when the war started, he chose to serve. He served in the Air Force, much like Jimmy Stewart. And Wyler had also shot footage for a documentary called Memphis Belle, which is all about the Allied bombing runs and the difficulty and danger of all that. So in order to get that footage, Wyler had to be there. So this is someone who not only had the chops as a director, but the authenticity of combat experience. Wyler's an interesting character. He is born in Europe to a Jewish family, German-Swiss origin, ends up emigrating pretty young to the United States, in part to find business opportunities and in part because he has family connections to Hollywood. So he starts out in a vein of nepotism being brought into the industry, but quickly proves himself an accomplished and deserving director. Ends up doing Mrs. Miniver, which wins Best Picture and is all about the home front experience of World War II. So he's primed and ready to make this film. Hand in hand with Wyler is Greg Toland as cinematographer, incredibly accomplished too. Wyler worked with Toland on a number of projects, and of course Greg Toland also did a little film for Orson Welles called Citizen Kane. So Greg Toland, arguably as important as Welles or Wyler in the history of American filmmaking. There's a scene in particular in this film, without spoiling too much, set in an abandoned airfield. One of the veterans is walking through this airfield, and the way it's shot will break your heart every time you watch it. I don't care how many times you've seen it, and I'm not really spoiling it because if you haven't seen it, it will hit you just as hard for me talking about it. Basically, this veteran walking through that airfield, and you see all the airplanes that are now not being used to fight, that are kind of abandoned, but it's kind of like a graveyard. There's something grim and melancholy about it. And of course, that's a stand-in so many ways for all the combat soldiers who didn't return home, and for those who did, their lives were ruined, destroyed, or at least forever changed. So between Toland and Wyler, you have a kind of perfect visual sensibility for this film. When you hit the acting, it's just as good. This is a cast for the ages. It's a cast many of my film course students will not know. They have to be educated about. But at the time, these were top-notch go-to players. You had Frederick March, you have Dana Andrews, you have Virginia Mayo, you have Myrna Loy, and you have Harold Russell. Now, Russell's an interesting case here we're going to get to in a minute. March ends up winning the Oscar for this film for Best Lead Actor, and he's terrific, as you would expect. March may not be a well-known name now, but in his time, he was considered an actor of great quality, a go-to person if you wanted an award caliber performance. And March is one of two actors who have won 2 Oscars for acting and 2 Tonys for acting. The other one would be Helen Hayes, so he's in very good company. So he rather predictably hits it out of the park in this film and takes home that Oscar. The other person who takes it home for Best Supporting Actor is Harold Russell, the complete opposite of Frederick March, in the sense that Harold Russell is a non-professional, non-actor, someone who had only been in a documentary before doing this film and would not do many films after it. And the reason for that is Harold Russell was himself a combat veteran. He had been in the war, and in the course of a training exercise, a faulty fuse on some TNT caused Russell to lose both his hands. And so as a double amputee, he's not using any special effects to bring that home in the movie. He is, in essence, playing the person he was in real life, a combat veteran who had paid a high, high price, not only physically, but psychologically, for his service. So Harold Russell ends up winning Best Supporting Actor. The story behind that is funny, though, because he was not a professional actor and he was competing against a bunch of pros. The assumption was he wouldn't win. So the Academy ended up giving Harold Russell an honorary Oscar for this part because they thought it was important. It was a symbolic gesture to all veterans, not just to this particular actor. So he brings home that honorary Oscar, and then lo and behold, he goes and wins the actual competitive Oscar. So Russell has the unique distinction of being the only actor in Oscar history to win 2 Oscars in one night for the same part in the exact same movie. Pretty extraordinary. So up and down, this cast is terrific. The visual style and storytelling are terrific, thanks to Greg Toland and William Wyler. And you're in for a real treat if you've never seen the film before. And if you have, it's worth revisiting 100 times or more. So I hope you'll enjoy it, and I hope we can talk about it online. Thank you so much.